thank you for joining us. And we're on day 2 of our Learn and Redefined conference, and it's our first ever online conference, and we're just looking to celebrate teaching and learning with the use of technology. I'm Graham Trick, the learning specialist here at Showbie, and if any of you haven't joined us on day 1 and not familiar with us, Showbie is a hybrid learning platform, and we're empowering over 3 million users. So it's all about how do we get that work out, how do we get it back, and how do we provide richer, deeper, more personalized feedback with the use of technology. And it's something we're proud and been doing for almost 10 years. You can find out more about us at showbie.com. During the presentations, please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions that you've got. We will look to answer those at the end. I'd like to welcome Ronan, Head of Digital Learning at Sevenoaks Prep School, and he's going to be running this session where we're looking to explore student-led learning with technology. So Ronan, I'm going to put myself on mute, and it's over to you, and thank you in advance for doing this session.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone who's listening in. So obviously I've just been introduced, but yeah, Ronan McNicholl, and Head of Digital Learning at Sevenoaks Prep School in the southeast of England, Kent. And this is a sort of reasonably big prep school, and my role is partly to deliver the computing curriculum, but also supporting teachers across the school, both in the pre-prep, which is kind of like the junior end of the school, as well as then the prep a part of the school, which is sort of years 3 up to year 8. Now, previously I have worked in Dubai, JS Arabian Ranches, as a head of primary IT and also a class teacher. And I lived in China for 2 years, worked in a school there, Dulwich College, and I was a coordinator of ICT, but also a class teacher for a period as well. And then also Belgium for 2 years after I qualified. And I taught middle school science, geography, maths, and also some class teaching. So I've kind of quite a varied background, in a bit of a mixture of being a class teacher and also being sort of an EdTech specialist coach. So the focus of my talk this morning is student-led learning, and it's something I'm incredibly passionate about, and something that I found really makes a massive difference to how children learn in schools. And whilst a lot of the ideas and the theory aren't new, of course, I think it's something that we as educators need to really keep prioritizing, and we need to keep banging the drum to try and encourage more teachers to kind of bring on board some of these ideas into their practice, because I think it really has makes a massive difference for students if they feel ownership and agency in relation to what they're learning. So I'd like to just start off with a few kind of definitions when I was reading around the topic. And some of these come from websites and blogs, and some of them are from academic journals. And we'll have a little reflection on sort of what we can take from these. So if I just start top left, student or peer-led learning is where students themselves facilitate their learning. So I think a key word there is facilitate. And that's, I think, an important part of this, because students, of course, student-led learning, naturally, the whole concept is about students having more agency and ownership over their learning. But the facilitator part's interesting also for teachers, because I suppose the traditional method of teaching and learning for a long time was for teachers to kind of impart knowledge and students absorb. And I think with student-led learning, the idea is that we're actually allowing teachers the chance to kind of step back and scaffold and provide frameworks, and for students then to be the ones who kind of lead learning. Then if we move down from that. I think this was a really powerful one, actually, and this is from a journal where Bernard reflected on the topic. Students might not only choose what to study, but how and why that topic might be an interesting one to study. So I think very important there is the how and the why. So naturally, if you're kind of setting a topic that students can learn about, naturally, it's easy to kind of give them a choice. And I think choice is a key word that we'll come back to time and time again through this presentation. But it's certainly quite an obvious one, really, to think I'll let you choose what you study or research. But I think the sort of the power in not just the what they study, but the how, the process, and the why. I think that's really quite powerful. And then further down, a teacher who promotes student-directed learning will allow kids choice within a range of potential objectives. So that word choice being quite key. And that was from Karen Randall in the States. Then teachers encourage student-centered learning, which allows students to share in decisions, believing in their capacity to lead, and remembering how it feels to learn. John McCarthy, and that's from an article published. Yeah. So again, involving students in the process of making decisions, coming to the fore there. And finally, that knowledge is constructed by students, and that the lecturer is a facilitator of learning rather than a presenter of information. From Kember, from Journal article now. Again, that idea that students have to construct their knowledge rather than sort of it being passed to them by a teacher, or in this case, a lecturer being referenced. So if we can kind of combine that, we've got a bit of an idea of what we're talking about. And hopefully, as I start to go through some concrete examples now, those will exemplify the kind of ideas that we're communicating here. So if I move to this slide, and this is a project that I've been delivering for some years now with year 6 students, so 10, 11-year-olds. And what they do in this project is they create a dream house in 3D. And typically we use a program called SketchUp. It was initially a Google product, and I think it's been acquired by Trimble in maybe quite a few years ago now already. But the great thing about this app is it allows students to really create professional designs. And you know, initially it can seem a bit daunting with all the tools and everything, but students can surprise you, particularly when they are in charge of their own learning and have ownership, how quickly they can pick things up from each other. So this is, you know, as I mentioned, this is a project I've been running for several years. And the reason I really like it is because it provides not only an excellent opportunity for student-led learning, but it provides a real opportunity for pupils to showcase all their creative and technical skill. And, you know, whilst when I deliver this, the students tend to stick with SketchUp. You could also offer a choice of apps to use to kind of reach the same goal, which is to create a dream house. You could also use Tinkercad, or you could use even Microsoft Odoo or something else. So there's flexibility there as well. So it's a project that usually lasts about 2 months, and at the beginning of the project, and when I first sort of realized the benefit of student-led learning, I realized that sort of rather than me as the teacher showing all these skills and tools and completely overwhelming the students, and also, you know, we're working with kids who like to explore for themselves and want to kind of self-discover. I thought rather than sort of do it in the old-fashioned didactic way, I realized many years ago, it's better to kind of, students are itching to get using it, better to try and let them just discover it. And what I do is, whenever they've figured out a tool, then I ask them to kind of share it with one other person. So if you find something new, share it with one other person. And another little strategy I use is to have a skills board. And if a student has kind of feels he or she has mastered a particular skill, then that student can write his or her name up on a skills board and as the go-to person. So when people look up and go, oh, what was that? Okay, I'd like to know how to rotate. Can you show me? And it starts to really build an environment where students are empowered to kind of take control of their learning. And at first, it was a bit like of a strange feeling to feel that they're in control and that they're kind of managing and running all the learning that's taking place. But that's this kind of whole paradigm, if you like, where the teacher's role is then to facilitate and just allow that creative learning to take place. If I just move on to the next slide. So these are kind of some of the benefits in terms of student-led learning. I think these kind of creative, open-ended tasks, as I say, they provide that framework for pupils to take charge. I appreciate if some of our audience have, depends to a certain extent of what subject you're teaching. Hopefully some of the ideas that I explain and deliver today can be adapted to your subject area. But I fully realize that it is a bit more difficult from one subject to another. And then, of course, when things like a syllabus and exams enter the fray, that also presents a challenge. But certainly tasks like this, which can be open-ended, are just absolutely ideal for student-led learning. So pupils can be encouraged to explore and learn about all the tools that are available, which I spoke about, and then creating that environment of sharing and collaboration. I think that's some of the kind of key advantages of a project like this, where they have that scope and possibility to really take ownership of the process. I should also mention that something I'm doing a lot of the projects that I deliver is to come up with success criteria with the students, and I'll show an example from a different project shortly. But the idea is rather than having a very sort of long rubric that's kind of given to the students, and then they feel a little bit almost beaten down that they've got to do all of this in kind of small text and it looks like a really serious document. I think it's quite powerful to kind of say, right, dream house, what do you think we need to come up with? What criteria can we develop together? And the students, they will quite quickly come up with really good ideas that they, that there should be a certain number of rooms, for example. Okay, that's great. And we kind of chalk that up. And then they might come up with ideas that there should be some sort of sense of scale and there should be some sense of precision and measurement. And that develops quite organically with the students. And then again, it's that process where they creating sort of those conditions where they are in charge of the learning. And my role is sort of coaching and supporting and helping them get to their intended goal. So the next project I wanted to speak a little bit about is a project that sadly I wasn't able to deliver in the same way. We adapted it this year as a result of obviously lockdown. But sort of pre-lockdown, this has been one of my favorite projects to run in the school. And this is something I do with Year 8 students, so 12 and 13-year-olds, and it's called Take for Good. And the concept is to essentially choose a real world theme. So it's inquiry based. They come up with a problem or they come up with a theme, and then and it has to be something that they're passionate about. And that's such an important part is actually the picking something that is topical and real world, and then they break that down. And then they finish with presenting what they've learned. And what we usually do is we kind of take over the school cafeteria. It's called the Oakery. And we invite parents and grandparents to come in. And I think that part of the process is, for this particular project, is really important. So not all student-led learning projects would need to include this, of course. It takes many different forms, but I think that sense of audience and purpose is very important, a very important part of student-led learning in this particular project, because the students in the process of researching and finding out all about endangered animals or marine pollution or mental health and the sort of topics that they unpick and research, to have that audience to then present that work to really is really important. So in this picture, you can see this was one of the dads a few years ago, and he had a bit of an accident on the ski slopes. But he's meeting one of our students who is sort of talking through her project on endangered animals and so the species which are endangered. As you can see, there's kind of like a display board which they all create. And this process of creating this sort of environment where they can kind of present to parents and who ask questions and walk around really makes the students proud of what they're doing, and it really gives them that sense of achievement. And that's the goal that they're motivated to work towards when they're doing the project, as well as obviously enjoying learning about the topic as well. So on the table, there's various publications, there's brochures, they make little like business cards. And a key part of that is allowing them to be as creative as they can with different apps, whether they're using iPads and using all different apps like iMovie and Keynote and pick collages, or whether they are creating on sort of desktops, websites. We've used Weebly in the past. And actually, I've just got a link here to a website from a different project, actually, on the ivory trade. And that was a project from this year when the students actually delivered this remotely to each other using Microsoft Teams. But just these are just one example of the kind of creative potential when the students are kind of given that opportunity to go off and self-select tools and apps and so on. So that's that piece of work. So I'll just whiz back to my PowerPoint now. And in the other pictures, you can see, again, students, when they have that ownership, they can go to town with these kind of projects. They're bringing in different things. And for some of the projects based around healthy foods and drinks, we had students making their own smoothies, coming up with their own varieties, and they just really enjoy that process of having an audience and also a purpose for their work. And obviously the technology part was incorporated in allowing them to create whatever they wanted, movies, animations, and so on. And whilst they say create whatever they want, it's not entirely just off you go and and I'll see you in 2 months and I hope it's all okay. Absolutely not. A big component of this, keeping an eye on time as well, a big component of this is to actually, again, work on success criteria with students. So in this particular students, we sort of start off with, well, this is your project. So, you tell me, how can we make this as good as it can be? What sort of things should we be thinking about? And then we come up with criteria like this in terms of organization, that they've stored and named their files, that the topic is something they're really passionate about. I think that's important if we're thinking about student-led learning, that they're actually motivated to want to learn about that topic, that they bring their own ideas to it so that it's not just all generated from the websites that they're using for research. That they are aware of important things like, what plagiarism is, that it's not just the copying and pasting, but it extends to just using other people's ideas, that, you need to be authentic yourself, and including your references and also aspects of copyright. And that's one of the great things if you are able to incorporate these kind of open-ended projects into your practice, because they then give them the opportunity to learn so many other things like digital literacy and so on. In terms of the content, then the ensuring that spelling and grammar has been checked, just basic stuff that's so important that of course, let's face it, if I'm sure in the audience, there's lots of teachers students will neglect this sort of thing. And having criteria like this also, it's kind of bringing them into the process, but also the hope is that then they take that pride and actually want to produce the best work they can. That their images are a good resolution is something that they came up with, that there's a good design. And whilst obviously this has been sort of typed up by me after receiving the ideas from students, it's kind of the initial brainstorming part can be done just on a whiteboard, and then it's that kind of process of then turning it into a proper document that they can use. And then the presentation part that they've rehearsed the delivery and prepared. One of the things we do when I tell them to have a little practice is go away, find somewhere to kind of, dummy present, and then list all the questions you think you could be asked. And again, that's just an important part of preparation for life and taking ownership of what they're doing. And that they've checked their work looks good, they've spread things out, their pictures and their text and so on. So good presentation skills. Those are some of the key points I wanted to communicate for this project, which is again a little bit different than the previous. But again, you can hopefully see that choice comes into this, which we met at the beginning. The how and the why is very important here, not just the what they're learning, but the process of what they're creating. That audience and purpose, why are they actually learning that information, studying that information, and so on. And also, I think just, it's so important to give them these chance to tackle these real world topics that they might hear about a little bit on the media, but they don't really know much about. If they hear that there's been a cyber attack in America that's kind of disrupted the delivery of oil and gas and these sort of things, just allowing them to engage with things that are dynamic and that aren't in textbooks right now. So that's really everything on that. And the last one is where we kind of promote app smashing. And the idea, this really comes into the how and the why. And I think that's a really important part of this. So whilst the initial criteria for this project, and I think a key point here is that not every project is the same, of course, or every piece of work. In this case, I do deliver some of the kind of main criteria that I want students to follow at the beginning. And in this case, I put ebook, but it could be, a keynote or anything that they produce. So the idea is that they have to try, they have to research a country from each continent, excluding Antarctica, and then they find out some key information. So that part of it sounds very traditional, but where the student-led learning and the app smashing come in are in the process, the how and the why. So I would kind of say, look, you're using iPads for this, so you can actually use any of these apps and you can combine these apps, and that's the smashing part. So, for the final piece of work that you present, you might want to use Book Creator as the example, but actually you could present your work with iMovie, explain everything, Keynote, and that's all fine. But in the actual process, not just what you actually produce at the end of it, you can also combine these. So if you want to make a movie and put that into Book Creator, or if you want to, if you want to use Piccollage and incorporate that into what you produce, that's fine too. Now, I will say, I'm not going to say that doesn't present its own challenges. It does. And obviously, with younger students, it becomes increasingly difficult to be that flexible and offer that many opportunities. But once they get familiar with a certain core suite of apps, so I wouldn't recommend just jumping straight into this, if I'm entirely honest, because they might not know how to use all these apps, and it could end up being a bit of a tough lesson to kind of deliver. But I would recommend start with, maybe they make an ebook and they know how to use Book Creator, and then maybe iMovie. And then once they've got familiarity with how to use those apps, that's whenever then you can actually app smash and allow them to sort of combine them, which is again great for student-led learning, because they're more in ownership of the workflow and the process rather than following a very specific process from beginning to end. Okay, so these are just a couple of examples of ebooks from the students. So yeah, so that's that kind of coming up with the success criteria. In this case, not the success criteria that I shared previously in terms of content was kind of initiated by me. But again, that involving the students in coming up with the success criteria for how they would work and what they would actually produce at the end of it, I think is important. And then it's something that should be something that can evolve as you go along through the project, rather than being something that's created at the very beginning and then they don't see it until the very end. I think it's important that you kind of bring this up every so often. And likewise, I mentioned the skills board that I use when I deliver that 3D design project. Similarly, whenever they learn skills and using these different apps, that's also something that can be kind of captured, and and the students know that they are like a master of that skill, or they know who to go to, and so on. So then there's some element of choice, and that, of course, the idea is they can pick the country. I'm not going to say you've got to do Brazil and South America. They can choose. And I think assessment is a final aspect. I think that's worth unpicking a little bit when we talk about student-led learning. I think with assessment, it's so important that it's assessment for learning. So rather than being just thinking in terms of how am I going to mark this in summative assessment and a grade, I think the assessment should be very dynamic in that you're using your success criteria, which students are referring to continuously through the project. And then when they do get to the end, that they can use their generated success criteria to self assess their work, and then up level, and then also peer assessing. So they're able to use their peers and use their peers self success criteria, and I think that's quite important, as opposed to it being sort of right, handed in, I'm going to mark it, kind of traditional. And then not trying to say that every sort of project or every sort of bit of work that students do should be student-led. I think all really we're trying to communicate today is how this can have an impact and how this can be beneficial for students. And hopefully in your domain, your discipline, that you can sort of, it sparks off some ideas about, actually, I could probably do that for this particular unit or something. So whilst it might not work for everything, it hopefully can find its place, because I think the benefits really are manifest in terms of student motivation. And when they're motivated to learn, then obviously they're going to learn more efficiently, there's going to be deeper learning, and they're going to be more proud of what they're learning. And ultimately, as kind of educators, we're going to enjoy seeing them and take pride and love kind of learning about their kind of topic. So that kind of, I think, 10:30 brings me to the end of my talk this morning. So I'm happy now to come back to field any questions. There you are.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ronan.
No
that's
problem.
been it's been absolutely fascinating for me. I really do love student-led learning in terms of the projects and the end products that the students bring up. There's a couple of questions that have come through. One was kind of around just after you talked about the skills boards, and it was around kind of how students might develop their skills with SketchUp. Do you use online tutorials? Do you give them lists, or do they learn the skills before you start the project? How do you kind of scaffold that in? That would be great if you could elaborate on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yeah, so I've done different things over the years. Some years I kind of direct them to a folder where there are videos that they can kind of just watch, and but I'll be entirely honest, they don't, even with the videos there that match the skills, they very rarely will look at the videos. Because what I found is the kids just like to go and just try and use it and figure it out. And whilst as a teacher, if I see that they're not succeeding, and my temptation is to dive in and kind of say, I'll show you how it works. What I tend to find is if I step back that the students like the challenge, and suddenly some other student will say, I've figured out how to use that. And then suddenly, in an organic way, they start to feed off each other. And whilst I'm there and I kind of say, look, if you want to know anything, I'm available as a resource. And then for students that kind of, let's say, are finding it a bit trickier, I'm happy to say, look, I'll offer a workshop here and you can come up and I'll do all the basics. But largely speaking, yeah, I don't give them any sort of written handouts anymore. I try to use video as much as possible. But with this particular project, I found the students just like to kind of figure it out for themselves by just clicking and trying to work it out rather than following a video.
And that's almost perfect for kind of the next question, because the students must be really confident at that point. And how do you build confidence with that students? How do you foster that kind of culture in the classroom where it would be it's fine to fail, because to go with that well-used acronym, first attempt in learning. So yeah, it'd be great to hear about kind of building that, how you build that confidence.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's another really good question. I'd say it isn't a fairy tale. Like if I reflect on, this was a unit, for example, that didn't lend itself to online learning as well as being in the classroom. I think this is a project that would definitely want to deliver in person. And what I found is over the years, some classes of students are a lot more confident with this kind of approach to learning than others, and they kind of the classes that aren't, then that's where I'll kind of, with them, if they're happy for me then to kind of show how some of the tools work, then I'll sort of take a little bit more control. Whereas with the students that are naturally more kind of resilient and kind of open to self-discovery, then I'm more inclined to kind of let them fly and just kind of try and kind of collaborate and work it out together. So I've noticed a mixed bag. I'd say the particular group I have this year would probably fall in the former camp, that they found it, that they wanted more direction, which is fine. I mean, that's ultimately, that's the important part of this, is that, as a teacher, when you assume a facilitator role, you have to be the one to judge whether, the students you have and their kind of personalities and like you say, how open to growth mindset they are and so on. You have to be the one to decide how much support to give and how much to kind of let go. So I'd say it really depends on the class. But the part where it's a very good question where I was asked, how do you build up self-confidence? I think that comes from really having that environment where it's, fail is seen as a first attempt in learning, FAIL, and just kind of keeping the environment warm and just trying to say, celebrating, oh, did you figure out how to use that? Right, everybody come over here, let's look. And just keeping the environment one where students feel relaxed and feel that, they can use each other as a resource, that there's not kind of high pressure or anything. So hopefully that gives you an idea. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just summarizing there, it's all about getting to know your students, because, that's the fascinating thing about teaching, is that although you might look and cover the same content year in, year out, you've got 30 different clients in the room every year. So you've got to figure out what makes them tick and what works for them. So having that, just knowing that no two projects are the same is from year to year is great.
Absolutely.
Just there was one question that came through about the timings. So how much time do you dedicate per week? Because obviously you've got such a wide curriculum to get in throughout a year. What kind of time do you put towards the projects and to dedicate to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is one that might kind of vary a little bit between, like, say, myself, a computing specialist and a class teacher. And I've kind of, obviously, I've done quite a lot of class teaching over the years as well. So I know the demands and time constraints can be different. As a computing specialist, you know, quite fortunate in that with a project like this, you could allocate easily 5-6 weeks to that. So that could be 5-6 lessons, which is a reasonably ample amount to be able to kind of allow time for them to get familiar with all the kind of tools and skills, and then to kind of have time to actually build the work. But one of the benefits is this is the sort of thing that they can then work on at home, and quite a lot of the students, when they kind of have the bug and are really kind of drawn in by what they're doing, they will then carry on at home and put countless hours in at weekends and so on. So that kind of really shows how they've kind of got a real passion for what they're learning. In terms of class teaching, obviously, again, it's when you're creating a scheme of work, it's just about trying to work within whatever block of time you have for that particular scheme of work. But of course, that's one of the challenges of teaching is trying to, and I think, you know, whilst we have the reality that you have to cover a certain amount, it's also important to think about the quality of what we're delivering and not just kind of getting through stuff.
Yeah, and if you've picked up, there's another question coming here. If you've picked up a kind of a class that are used to being having teacher-led learning, and you transition them towards this student-led learning approach, how do you kind of scaffold that? Do you give them, do you build them up through giving them choice of say 3-4 activities? Do you just go whole hog into into an open-ended activity? It'd be great to know kind of advice around that for people who are new to implementing student-led learning.
Yeah, I think yeah, if you're new to it, I think it's definitely advisable to phase it in, because it's new for you as well and not just the students, right? So I think kind of pick one project, and then try and build in some of the ideas. And you know, like I was saying when I was describing the Year 4 project, I wouldn't necessarily advocate saying like use any of these apps and you can app smash when they haven't used them before, because for sure, you know, the students will very quickly kind of let you know, I've got no idea how to use this, and you're going to have hands up all over the place. I think it's about building an environment and a culture where that's the kind of the norm, and that takes time. That's not going to happen overnight. Mm-hmm. So pick one project, build in some ideas. Then if you think that's been successful, that you've seen the students have taken more ownership, then you can kind of build on that, and gradually you'll get more comfortable with it. And it's about sort of transitioning from feeling that you have to be totally in control, and the students have to follow exactly what it is you need them to do, and then you mark it and move on to where they are actually contributing and more in kind of control of the learning process. And I think when you do that and it works, it's very powerful. You actually see they've got a lot more from it than they would have previously.
Yeah, and I suppose from that point of view, that's where the power of agreed success criteria come in, because if somebody throws open a curveball, you can open up the question and check that actually, if it came to they've never used Explain Everything ever before, you can have that power of conversation and saying, well, actually, why do you want to use it? How can you use it? And then you've got the general consensus of whether or not it's going to come in, isn't it? So
absolutely,
yeah. Is that the kind of thing that you do with the success criteria when it comes to, I suppose, the skills element or the type of technology that they're going to use?
Yeah, for the kind of app side of things, for sure. And if you kind of say, right, if you're using Explain Everything, you know, can you think of 3 things we need to think about? And again, just kind of involving them in that process. But those kind of projects where they can pick between different apps, certainly it opens up a lot more scope for creativity and freedom. But I think as a teacher, you still need to, just like you described, kind of have some basis for kind of this is the criteria if you're going to use that. If it's a pic collage, what do you think you could do? And if you create that, where could you put that? So just having those discussions, it's about those are learning discussions essentially, and that's great because that's the why and the how, as opposed to sort of saying, right, you're going to make a keynote and you're going to have 5 slides, and then you've got so many weeks to do it, and no other sort of opportunity for any inclusion of different apps, ideas, creativity, and so on. So
yeah, so when they're talking about those specific the types of apps, do you link it back to the content and actually drive conversations around, actually, is it suitable for the content we're trying to achieve? Is that the kind of conversation that you have?
Yeah, so if it's, for example, if they express an interest in creating a pic collage, I would, for instance, kind of say, what would you create a pic collage of? And then they'll say, well, I'm doing Brazil, so I'd like to have maybe famous monuments, Christ the Redeemer, and so on from Brazil. And then that links into the content as well. So it's I think the content, whilst in that example I'm giving was kind of the content criteria was defined by me. I think it does exactly as you described, then sync with the conversations you have about the process they're following and the workflow they're following to produce their final piece of work.
Yeah, so for all intents and purposes, if you're an outside looking in, it might look like chaos, but actually it's really quite tightly structured because of the way that you put the time in at the start to put together that success criteria behind the question, the content that the students are going to be learning. And there's a question just come in. How do you develop critical thinking and the thinking about the information from the quality of the sources that they use? So it'd be great if you could unpack that a little bit in terms of how you develop that.
Yeah, so I think that's a very, very good question in terms of the quality of sources. So I think one of the initial things that I usually do is sort of when students have found websites is then, see, if I think of the Take for Good project, I would look at how they've used the information that they've got from those websites. And quite often, for students that have difficulty interpreting the information they've read, then that's when they might be tempted to copy and paste, or they find it harder to sort of that information literacy. They find it harder to know how to use that information successfully. So what I quite often do is kind of reflect on that with them and kind of, just say essentially if the website's too difficult, you need to go and find another one, and then model actually, and that's something kind of do within a lot of these projects, is a model process of having a particular website and how you can go about not only finding those websites from a kind of blind Google search and efficient methods of searching, but when they find a website, can you understand this? Yes. Okay, so then you can kind of read through, okay, and skim and scan, and then that process of taking that and extracting that information in a way that then the students can kind of use and bring their ideas to it. So they usually, what they do for that research part is they usually say, I want you to go away and try and find maybe 5 or 6 different websites, and then include several bullet points from each of those sites so that you've kind of recorded what you've kind of the main things you've learned. But then the next stage in the process is starting to kind of bring their own kind of thinking to it. So with younger students, I tend to, rather than sort of letting them kind of go off and Google and find things for themselves, quite often, with the Year 4s this year, I did give them the opportunity to have a Google and try and find information, and they would use websites like there's DK Find Out, which is great. And then you have Woodlands, which is really good. Several sites that have really good information. Of course, there's lots on BBC Bite Size and so on. But also for students that are finding it tricky to find information, then you can have banks of URLs as well, just to support them, because otherwise, if there's no kind of, scaffolding in place, then those students could be completely lost. So yeah, so through support and modeling, I suppose, is to summarize. Yeah.
And then do you give advice through that modeling about reliability as well as kind of the quality of the information?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's one that's quite a big topic that we kind of unpick, and we kind of also, you know, within the computing curriculum, it's something I deliver as a kind of a block of work. So they learn about how there's so many fake websites out there and how to spot, you know, how to spot fake websites and you know, check your information across 2 or 3 different websites if you can. With year 5, we just recently were looking at a website called the Pacific Northwest Tree Octopus, of all things, but it's a great one for teaching students about, you know, fake information, and they kind of, they will kind of look at this website and they think it's real, and they'll kind of, I usually say, right, you've got to come up with a who, what, where, when, why, how question, and then find the answer on the site. And then at the end of the lesson, kind of say it's completely fake, and they're usually astounded. Because they say the website looks so good, look real. I say, you know, yeah. So we have a lot of conversations around, reliability and also bias within websites and so on.
Yeah, and then do you use that kind of common language from the computing curriculum within the projects when you, so it becomes familiar to them? Is that kind of process that you take behind it?
Exactly, yeah. So that's the idea, that kind of each year they kind of build up, and yeah.
So one piece of advice for people who are starting to do this for the first time: be really good friends with your computing lead to find out actually what terminology they're using when it comes to safe internet searches, that kind of thing. So it's actually less of it's, I suppose, less of a thing that you need to put in because you know what the processes are and you know what they learn from other subjects. I'm just going to open it up. Are there any more questions to come in from anybody? It doesn't look like there's any more questions to come in. So once again, I'd just like to thank you for sharing your experiences and your wealth of knowledge around student-led learning. I've found it an absolutely fascinating session, and just like to thank you for giving up the time for us today. If anybody wants to find out any more, we've got networking sessions at the back end of the day. Feel free to come along. I'll be attending that. There's a couple of the people from the team from Showbie are in there as well, and there's a lot of educators coming along to that one just to say hello as much as anything. We've got a session around Explain Everything coming up a little bit later on today, along with science, and then there's a panel session this evening. So it would be great to see anybody, if you're available, to come along there. There will be a recording on this, so if you've been furiously trying to make notes and you've missed some bits, you can watch it out. Just keep an eye out on our social media platforms for those going live, and I'm sure you'll get an email as well. So Ronan, once again, thank you very much for an absolutely brilliant session.
Yes, absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.